Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here this evening. I'd like to ask some broad questions on scoping of the strategic shipping fleet that Labor has announced and that we support. It's been something we've been pushing for a while. And then I'd like to ask a few questions building on what Senator O'Sullivan's been talking about. Turning to the proposal for a strategic fleet, Queensland should be a big winner out of this. With a long coastline currently underserved by road and rail transport, a national rail circuit would help that too, which I'll ask about later. However, the idea is to encourage private ownership of ships to service the Australian coastline and the Pacific, which could then be requisitioned in the event of an emergency, like the next virus or whatever. The report doesn't go into detail about where the freight will come from, so we don't know if it's commercially viable, specifically which companies and how many containers. Do you have any information on where the containers are going to come from to keep container vessels commercially engaged in the scheme? Well, what's the volume of cargo? Or is this just very early days?
Ask Mr. Johnson to answer that question.
Andrew Johnson, Assistant Secretary, Strategic Fleet. Thanks, Senator. The planned approach in terms of selecting the vessels for the strategic fleet is to approach the market, and one of the questions for that marketplace is both what's the capability of vessels they might put forward to join the strategic fleet, but also the commerciality of those vessels, which really goes to what freight are they moving currently, and how do they propose that their vessels will fit into the commercial marketplace, and that'll give us the information on what are the volumes of cargo and those sorts of things that would be moved on a normal day-to-day basis. But the vessel would be Australian flagged and crewed, and therefore, as part of the arrangements to join the strategic fleet, will be available for that requisition.
So am I right in assessing then, Mr Johnson, that it's very loose, maybe deliberately so, and maybe commendably so, arrangement at the moment hasn't been fleshed out?
Yeah, I think part of the what we're looking at in terms of how the fleet's established is to, in fact, get the industry to come forward with those views on how that capability might be provided and what's commercial in the marketplace. So rather than us trying to identify what's commercial, then the industry would provide that in the proposals put forward to join the fleet, which we would then match up with the capabilities and capacities of the fleet that would suit the purposes for requisition later. So sort of work with industry to join the two through the approach to market process.
The funding in this budget is $21.7 million over 5 years, which seems enough to keep a small team of bureaucrats busy but little else. Does that not seem to include the funding for the tax incentives and other costs in the scheme once operational? Can you confirm whether the funding is pre-operational only?
Senator, that is correct. That is the funding to support the administration of the strategic fleet and implementation of the other recommendations in the Strategic Fleet Task Force report, and the amount of funding to actually support implementation of the fleet has been allocated but hasn't been announced.
Has been allocated but not announced?
Yes, Senator.
I think that it is not for publication,
yes.
And that is so that it doesn't prejudice the government getting negotiations with market players so that we can get value for money.
Okay, thank you. I know that during COVID, our field reserves got down to just 2 days, which is very poor governance, in my opinion. This does illustrate why we need a strategic fleet, but the delay worries me. Can you confirm that there will not be one extra ship with Australian crew operational in Australia as a result of this scheme within the next 5 years?
Senator, the intention is to have the 3 vessels identified announced in the budget by the government operational within the next 5 years.
Within 5 years, okay. Minister, I've had the Maritime Union and the shipping operator on the phone asking for more details, actually asking for a meeting with the department and the minister to see how they can respond to this development and swing freight over to the strategic fleet. Should I tell them to come back in 5 years, or will you meet with them to get the ball rolling on planning new freight routes for container transport?
I'm sure that people would be happy to take a request for a meeting, Senator Roberts. But as you heard just then from Mr Johnson, we are keen to get this operating sooner than the 5 years.
Thank you.